making my distinction little time at the beginning of the talk between religion as belief system and education system, I think this can be seen quite clearly in relation to morality. Now, in the theistic systems, morality is considered to be laid down by the deity, the supreme deity or God, for human beings to follow and to obey, and there is reward and punishment involved. And because the morality is derived from God, then there is a question of intercession, there's a question of prayer and asking to be forgiven, and so on and so forth. In Buddhism, there is no conception that the Buddha laid down, what's right and what's wrong, and rewards or punishes people. The idea is that the Buddha is someone who understood the nature, human nature, the way things are, the way the world is, and taught the most skillful and intelligent way to live in the world in order to harmonize with those laws. And that being so, the moral code is one which is based on human psychology, and most particularly volition or intention. So the training in morality is a training of volition. Now, generally speaking, we're not very skilled in separating volition from action, especially under pressure, when we don't really have time to think about things. We find we've already acted and already spoken by the time we realize that wasn't such a wise thing to do, or wasn't in line with our principles or our ideals. And the Buddha's teaching of mindfulness and being awake and present to our actions seems reasonable, but it's extremely difficult to do. But one of the points about mindfulness is that you have to be mindful of something. Mindfulness needs a peg or pegs, and that's why mindfulness is closely akin to memory. It's a certain kind of memory. Now, as far as morality is considered, moral training, the training of conduct, of body and speech, the skillful means the Buddha gave us is to voluntarily adopt certain standards of conduct and speech, and to reflect on those often, so that they become almost second nature to us. So that in the case that we might be tempted to hurt somebody, or to speak harshly, or to do something dishonest, then as we consider that action, or as we're about to perform that action, then if we've really given ourselves to this study and training, the memory, the mindfulness of a precept, of a standard, a training standard pops up into our mind that no, this is against the precept. So it's not that that there's someone going to punish us, but there's this awareness. We become awake in that moment that what we're planning to do conflicts with the standard that we have adopted. And have a ability to be patient and just to bear with that impulse to act, then that impulse to act passes away. And it's at that moment that you have a moment of insight, and you see that that impulse is not who you really are. It's a passing impulse, which is the product of certain causes and conditions, and you don't have to act upon it. And it's here where you drive a wedge in between volition and action, that you first experience a sense of freedom and the ability to choose wisely. But as long as you lack that kind of mindfulness and clear standards to be mindful of, then we're usually wise after the event. So mindfulness means the ability to apply your intelligence and wisdom at the moment when it's most needed, and the moment when there's some conflict and some pressure upon you to act in an unskillful way. So the determining factor is volition. Now, certain acts may seem to be reasonable or to be permitted under certain circumstances, but if one still has the volition to act, then the karma has been created. So, let's say a case of killing another human being. The worst kind of karma would be in the case of someone who plans a murder long in advance and determines to do it in the cruelest, most awful way. Whereas a much weaker case might be mercy killing, euthanasia, or a soldier who's been drafted into the army against his will and forced onto the battlefield and kills somebody else to save their own life. But whatever the reasons might be, and however sympathetic one might be to them, the determining factor of whether karma has been created or not is whether there has been the intention to kill, and whether that intention has been acted upon and is successful. So the intensity of the karma is affected by the reasons, but not the production of karma itself. So on the question of karma, again, this is not something which is always so clear cut. One of the, or not so easily seen. Again, there is a certain necessity for faith or trust. Here, often you hear people who die a horrible death or have some bad experience, and they say, "Oh, it's because I did this when I was a child," or obviously that's just the result of that. But karma is far more complex than that, and is very rarely so clearly seen as you steal something from them, and then a few days later or a few years later someone steals something from you. It's far more complex than that, and certain aspects of the law of karma have to be taken on trust. But they can also be verified in certain areas. That's particularly the area in which you can verify karma is that every time you act upon a particular impulse, then that action becomes more likely in the future.